Good morning. Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us this morning and Happy New Year. First, I want to welcome newcomers to the EPN among you. As a reminder, the only way to receive notices of the monthly breakfast program is to sign up as an EPN participant. It's free, quick, and easy. Just go to the website, epn.osu.edu, and you can find information about the upcoming program. And we've got a great set of programs scheduled for this year, and I think Joe's even thinking about next year already, too. So we're always looking for ideas, too. So if you have any for us, please feed them our way. We have a very exciting program for you today that features a new generation of environmental professionals working with an organization that takes a new style approach to a very old profession, brewing beer with an environmental and sustainability ethic. Land Grant's sustainability manager, Vincent Valentino, will be sharing successes, challenges, and failures that the brewery has faced in its first year pursuing sustainability. Talk about their partnership with urban farmers, Columbus community groups, and where they want to go next. But before we start the new year and a new program, let me quickly reflect on some data that I think Molly Hardesty put together for us, who greets you at the front desk there, just to give you a flavor for sort of like where we were in the fall. We didn't really need to put slides together this, but we did. 341 unique individuals attended our EPN programs in the fall semester. Over a quarter of you participated in at least 2 or more events during that time. So we're excited about the scope of this. If we scale it up, we figure maybe 800 to 1,000 people, unique individuals, participate in our non-signature events during the course of the year. 77 participants in last fall's EPNs were students. 74% of their students were from the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. Other colleges represented included business, engineering, law, arts and sciences, nursing, and public health. We're delighted to have such a diversity of folks joining us, and as we look to sort of the future, we hope to expand through creative programs that can bring new environmental professionals into the field, such as what we're profiling today. In the school's 50 years of existence, we can also point to a lot of innovations that we've tried to do over the years. One of those innovations was the EADS major, which Vincent graduated from a couple years ago, where we tried to weave together interdisciplinary programming to allow students to have an understanding of business, economics, and sociology. This is a creative major, and I think it's something that Ohio State's going to be doing more of in the future, weaving together expertise in various academic departments. In this particular case, EADS was a combination between the Department of Agricultural Economics Development, Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics, and the School of Environment and Natural Resources. Another innovation that we're delighted to bring to you today, and it's something that we're always committed to in the form of continuous improvement, is that we're going to be a zero waste event today. I don't quite understand all the signage here, but there are signs around that will explain to you what to do with your various table scraps and what we'd call trash. 90% of today's, we hope to divert 90% of today's breakfast program materials from landfill through composting and recycling. So please pay attention to those signs. I don't see them in here, Joe. You said there would be signs up all over the place. Oh, they're posted above the, yeah, they're small. So please take advantage of that, and we appreciate your help. Any other sort of feedback you can give to us in terms of how we can sort of make this event more green and consistent with our values, please let us know. For this month's EPN breakfast program, we are very honored to feature an alumnus, a member of the second class of EADS majors at Ohio State University, who has a very interesting story to tell about how he worked to envision a future for himself and his company that includes strategic efforts toward environmental, business, and social sustainability. Vincent's emerging work and career path is one example of what a young environmental professional in our community can be. Vincent is playing a critical role with his company, Land Grant Brewing Company, a small urban craft brewery located in Franklinton and founded and staffed by Ohio State alumni, as it aims to become the most sustainable brewery in Central Ohio. Dr. Chris Tanner, a friend of Vincent's and a professor of avian wildlife ecology, worked with the EPN to develop today's topic area and prepared remarks to introduce our speaker today. Chris's family has participated in the Garden of Hope at Ohio State's Waterman Farm that Land Grant has supported. Unfortunately, Chris suffered a sudden loss in his family and had to travel back east, so he is unable to join us today. But he did put together some very touching remarks, and I've invited Joe Campbell, EPN director, to read those comments as a way of introducing our today's speaker. So, Joe?
Thank you. So this is from Chris Tanner. When I first came to Columbus 3.5 years ago, the concept of land grant was somewhat abstract. It meant a lot that I was in the College of Agriculture at a land-grant university, yet outside of the history of the university, I did not appreciate what this meant for me as a representative of this great institution. It was later I really understood how important those two words were to my job. We are here to not only educate and push boundaries of knowledge and innovation, but more importantly, to ensure that the people of Ohio benefit from this work in ways that can potentially transform their work and their lives. Our roots are firmly entwined in the Ohio soil, and our work is like the mycorrhiza that provides the nutrients of knowledge to our farmers, foresters, and all of those who are tied to and dependent upon the land. Also, 3.5 years ago, a small business began taking root in Franklinton, also with land grant attached to its name. Perhaps the name was what first attracted me to Land Grant Brewing Company, given my new position and, of course, the fantastically crafted beer. Yet what has fascinated me since then about this business is how much substance there is behind that name. As you will hear from Vinny today, in a little more than 3 years, Land Grant 2 has been growing deep roots in the central Ohio soil. Through their sustainability and community programs, they are working to be a model of a local business that gives back to those tied to the land and to the city. Their work has the potential to change a blossoming industry for the better, locally and perhaps beyond. In many ways, they affect people's lives for the better. The Brewing Company's dedication to a land grant mission is perhaps nowhere more evident than their growing connections to our own Waterman farm. Vinny will no doubt speak volumes to this relationship, but I do want to highlight their work with the Garden of Hope for survivors of cancer. The garden is a way our college and our university can give back to those dealing with the most difficult of situations in our city, providing nutrition and wholesome foods for healing. It takes a lot to make it through the immense challenge of a cancer diagnosis, and no one does it alone. Of course, there are the people that you could never make it through without, the doctors, the surgeons, nurses, and researchers. Perhaps less appreciated are the other people who contribute seemingly small things: the meals, the rides to the doctor, the afternoon watching a child. Those things are anything but small, however, as they get your family through the many hard and potentially lonely days. This is true of organizations and businesses in a community as well, like a university providing a vegetable garden or a local brewery choosing to contribute to that garden to benefit the people of their community in their hardest hour, while also trying to provide a healthier environment for all the city's residents. These things, though seemingly small, do make a difference in the lives of Ohioans, the definition of what being land grant is all about. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Vincent Valentino.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. As I said, my name is Vincent Valentino. I am a 2015 graduate of the Ohio State EATS program. And my goal here today is to tell you about Land Grant Sustainability Program, but I also want to be very clear about it. Talk to the mic. Right, there's a mic. I'm not gonna lie, this is the first time I've talked to a group this large, so please bear with me. There's a small chance I'm gonna cuss. So before I get too into this, how many students are here? Could you raise your hands if you're a student, please? Cool. And how many people here are familiar with the term land grant? Not the brewery, but what an actual land grant is. Thank God. So you should also know there are Sea Grant colleges, Space Grant colleges, Urban Grant colleges, and Sun Grant colleges. That'll come into play later on. And how many people here are even remotely familiar with the science behind brewing beer? A little bit less, okay. Totally fine. In the shortest of terms, we take malted grain, we mash it, separate the sugars, boil the water, ferment it, and package it. I just say that so we all have kind of a starting point. But before I talk about the sustainability program at Land Grant, I want to tell you a little bit about the story because it's important to know that what I do at Land Grant is only possible because the people I work for have the will to act. They want to do something about it. So Land Grant began with a Kickstarter campaign in 2012. Our three principal owners are Adam Benner, Walt Keys, and Quentin Jesse. Now, Adam and Walt were graduates from Ohio State way back in the day in the early 2000s, which is ba-dooms. So when Adam and Walt graduated, Adam has a background in IT and finance. Walt is a graphic design and work in publishing. They went their separate ways. Walt spent a little bit of time in New York. Adam spent a little bit of time in Chicago. When Adam was in Chicago was when there was a kind of second craft beer boom. And he learned a little bit about brewing, and he started doing some home brewing. At the same time, he'd be sending his recipes to his friend from college, Walt. Walt, the graphic designer, would make labels. And eventually they reached a point where they realized what they were making tasted better and looked better than what they were finding in the stores. So they got this idea of starting a craft brewery. So they began with a Kickstarter, and they were both married at the time, and the story is they made the promise to their wives if they didn't reach the amount that they were trying to make, they would kind of let it go and not worry about it. Fortunately for me, they were successful. They raised $40,000 in that campaign, and then they began to look in earnest for where they could start a brewery. Now, Chicago, by this point, was a little too saturated, same with New York, at least that was their opinion at the time. And they both missed Columbus. They loved their time at OSU here. So they also realized that Columbus seemed ripe for an explosion of breweries. And there's now like 20-some breweries here. So they were pretty on the nose with that. When they came back here, they met Quentin Jesse, our third principal owner. Quentin was also trying to do the same thing. He was trying to open a brewery. Quentin has a background in the pharmaceuticals industry, went to Ohio Northern. Eventually, they pooled their resources, raised some more money, and bought that fine-looking building at the top there, down in Franklinton, just behind Cosi, and they brewed the first batch of beer and opened in 2014. So that chart you see on the right, I just want to give you a sense of scale of how much beer we're creating over time. The red line is the last year. That's the total number of barrels we've produced. So when I say barrels all throughout this presentation, a keg, kind of a big silver keg that you're used to seeing, that is a half barrel. So a full barrel is 2 of those kegs. So last year we did just under 7,000 barrels, which means we did about 14,000 kegs. And the barrelage of a brewery is how you kind of get a grasp on its size. So we rehabbed this building when we opened. This is a before picture. They didn't have color back in the day. This is what it looks like. It looks like now. I told you that joke would kill. Again, this is what the inside of the brewery looked like. This building had been abandoned in Franklinton for 15 years up to this point. This is what it looks like now. There's more tanks in there now. This is an older picture. But before I go too much further about land grant, I want to tell you about myself. Again, my name is Vincent Valentino. I graduated from Ohio State in 2015. Before that, though, I did my freshman year at Ohio University. I think I had like 4 majors by the end of that year, so I decided to take some time off. I moved here, took about a year and a half off school. And then I went back in 2012, which really worked out in my favor because that's just around when the EADS program was getting started. I was telling Jeff Sharp earlier that I went to a student group meeting when I went back to school, and I was the only person in the group who wasn't an EADS major. So I joined it. I really, really, really enjoyed the program. I felt like I learned a lot from it. When I graduated in 2015, I had bartended my way through college, and I wasn't really in a rush to take on a new job. So took a bit of the summer off. I played a little bit of music, spent some time hanging out, going on tour and all that stuff. Then at the end of 2015, I decided to try and put my degree to use. I worked briefly in the development research industry as kind of an energy analyst. In 2016, I was the state organizer for the Environmental Defense Fund's climate change campaign. It's called Defend Our Future. I think they're still active on campus. It's a chance I came and spoke to one of your classes back then. But campaigns are temporary. I didn't really have a long-term position after November of 2016. So I got back into bartending. I had a friend who worked at Land Grant, and turns out they needed a bartender. So I started as a part-time bartender in 2016. Now, I say all of this because with this climate change campaign, one of the difficulties you find as a climate activist is how do you communicate the abstract impacts of climate change to everyday people? I can tell you that things are going to get X degrees warmer in a best case scenario, or X degrees colder, or, well, not colder, but So we came up with this idea to communicate the impact to people by saying, these are the effects of climate change. Stay close to this mic. These are the effects of climate change in agriculture, and here's what it'll look like in a glass of beer. We called it Defend Our Beer. And we worked with an urban farmer, Max Slater, over at St. Stephen's Community House, and we worked with Adam Benner, the president of Land Grant, to put together, an hour-long program, a little questionnaire. And it was during that kind of event prep that I realized, or I found out from our owner, that they originally had wanted Land Grant to be known to be a sustainable brewery. That was one of their original parts of their vision. It was one of their aspects of their Kickstarter campaign. When they opened in 2014, though, they had 4 employees, and 3 of them were the owners. So they didn't really have the expertise or manpower to get that going. When I joined, we were just under 2 years old. I approached him after that event and said, this is something I'm really interested in looking at. This is something I'd like to be a part of. Can we sit down and talk about this sometime? So I did a little bit of research. I looked at some of the stuff he offered, and then I pitched the position of sustainability manager, and they hired me on after the campaign in November of 2016. So when I say I did some research, I found some pretty cool things. The first place I started, however, was I looked at what the biggest breweries were doing, what the most sustainable breweries were doing. And that is Sierra Nevada is arguably the largest craft brewer in the United States. New Belgium Brewing out in Fort Collins is, without a doubt, one of the most sustainable companies in the country, if not the world. They are both the second and third largest breweries in the country. New Belgium does an incredible job. They're very forthcoming with their research and their resources, and they've really blazed a really cool path forward for the craft beer industry. But knowing that they're both out on the West Coast, I decided that I needed to take regionality into consideration. So I decided to see what the most sustainable brewery in the Midwest was doing, which is Great Lakes Brewing Company up in Cleveland. They also have an incredibly strong sustainability program. They don't promote it as much for some reason. And then I realized with all of these things too, you heard me say earlier that we did just under 7,000 barrels of beer last year. Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, and Great Lakes all do more than 1 million barrels in a year. So there's a sense of scale there. So I looked at Brewery Vivant in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They're a little bit more in line with our scale. They're still a bit bigger than us, but they are, without a doubt, probably the most sustainable brewery of this size, around 20,000 barrels. With all of those things in mind, I also looked into what the Brewers Association is doing. And what I found there was very inspiring and incredibly helpful for my job. The Brewers Association has an incredibly genuine push for sustainability in the craft beer industry. And when I say incredibly genuine, I mean that this pyramid on the right here is their recommended method for becoming sustainable. And if you look at the top, you'll see that your end goal in being sustainable, as recommended by the Brewing Association, is to convert to a circular economy. And to see that kind of language in business and technical materials is inspiring to me, because it's more than just turn your lights off or recycle. It's actually be and operate as a different business. So they published these different benchmarking and industry reports. That one there is from 2016. They also published these technical manuals. Now, these manuals are free if you are a member of the Brewers Association. If you're not, this is probably $2 million worth of information. This is technical information on energy, water, wastewater, building design, and solid waste. Each of these is anywhere from 40 to 70 pages long, and they're everything from best practices to case studies, and it's all catered towards brewing. And I guess I want to stop there and say that up to this point, I've told you nothing about what Land Grant does, but what I have told you is that there are 2 very important things that allow me to work on the sustainability program at Land Grant. The first is owners that believe in climate change and want to do something and become sustainable. The second is collaboration across the industry to provide resources to do just that. From there, this is everyone who works at Land Grant. That's me at the bottom with my hair down. We had all this information, but we also wanted to make sure that we listened to our employees. So we sent out a materiality questionnaire to our entire staff, and we asked them what was important to them. Is it water? Is it fighting climate change? Is it recycling? So on and so forth. And with our about 40-person staff responding to this, we created the 4 pillars of our sustainability management system. Mitigation of life cycle impact, reduction of carbon footprint, water stewardship, and community. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this is walk through each of these, tell you a little bit about some of my kind of models for research. But what I also want to do is be transparent with you. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that everything worked perfectly and this all went fine. I want a sense of reality. Some things really didn't work out. Some things were just a bad idea. Some things did work out. So we launched the Sun Grant program in the beginning of this year, based on that research and based on our 4 pillars of our sustainability management system. We set up a 3-year plan, 3 years as recommended by the Brewers Association, long enough to get some sizable impacts done, short enough to keep everyone's interest. And we set some pretty lofty goals for our operations and our utilities. We have a goal by 2020 to do a 69% reduction in our electricity usage, 34% reduction in our gas usage, 33% reduction in our water usage, diversion of all of our brewing byproducts, which I'll explain a little bit, 95% solid waste diversion, creation of a zero waste event program because we hold very large events outside the brewery. All in all, a 26% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. So these are some sizable goals, but I'll explain later in this presentation why some Brewers Association tools allowed me to set these goals, how these are not unreasonable, how these are very, very possible, and why I know that. But at the same time, we realize that we're a brewery with the name Land Grant. We have a Space Grant series. We have a Black IPA. We have a Sea Grant series, which is pretty much life aquatic themed. That's all out right now if anybody wants that. But we didn't have a Sun Grant series. We do some philanthropic dedicated beers that I'll explain later. But when I pitched the position, I also had the idea that we needed some kind of a Sun Grant beer that could serve as a fundraiser for our internal energy efficiency programs, for our maintenance programs. But I also thought it could be a showcase in what a sustainable beer looks like. So we created the Ra being the sun deity from ancient Egypt. This is a fossil-free honey blonde ale. It is made with Ohio hops, grown in Ohio. They're second-year Cascade hops. Amber honey from Stratford Ecological Center, just north of Columbus. And fossil-free malts from a malting company called Raw Malts. They malt these, fossil-free malts are made with this biomass-powered suspension-fired boiler. I don't know what that means, but I know that it's like 3 or 4 stories tall. There's no fossil fuels used at all in the malting process, and it's the second reactor of its kind in the world. This one is, I believe, in northern Montana or something like that. So what we were able to do here is create a beer that is potentially as sustainable as possible. We've greatly reduced our carbon footprint. We've sourced locally. And by the end of last year, this was, I think, our 4th or 5th fastest selling beer. So we have successfully made the case for why sustainable beer sells and how you can source locally. At the same time, sustainability doesn't happen in a bubble, so we needed a research model, a continuous updating research model. So there were 3 things that we identified as being important to our ongoing sustainability efforts. The first is what's happening in brewing sustainability, that top icon. Like I said earlier, the BA puts out those technical manuals. They put out that one on building design in the middle of last year. They have some ongoing work in hop sourcing and supply chain diversification. So that's something I try to keep my ear to the ground on. At the same time, general sustainability in the bottom right. That's important because, as we all know, the industry seems to be changing. The cost of solar and cost of wind keeps going down. And those are things I try to keep an eye on so that I can take advantage of them should they change and we can become more sustainable or look out for impacts in the industry. And then finally, geopolitics. I'm a person that believes environmentalism, sustainability shouldn't be politics, but fortunately it is. With that in mind, I try to keep a lookout for any policy changes at the local, federal, state level that could potentially impact us negatively or positively. For example, in this tax bill, there was a wonder for a while if they would include the tax credits for EV vehicles or for renewable energy in general. Thankfully, some of that stuff seems to have gone through. But those are some examples of things that outside of these operations projects, we try to keep track of what's going on in sustainability at large. So for the first pillar of mitigation of life cycle impact, this is something that was a bit of a catch-all. We wanted to try and measure how we divert our waste from our operations, what we do for our downstream supply chain and our upstream supply chain. So a couple projects right off the bat were our zero waste program for our larger events. We ended up working with SWACO. We based it actually very largely in part on OSU's zero waste program. And we were able to divert a lot of, I'll throw the numbers up here later, but we were able to pull this off pretty successfully for a couple of our larger events. We also were able to take advantage of the Ohio EPA's materials marketplace. This is a new program that was run, that began this year in Ohio, and it's essentially an interface to promote a circular economy. For example, if we have an excess of pallets in the back of our place, something that we use a ton of, but we don't always need a ton of, if we have an excess of that, I can get on this platform, I can find somebody else in industrial sector or otherwise that might need these, and I can work out a trade with them, I can sell it to them, they can buy it from us, and it just kind of facilitates a circular economy at the state level. We also, as I mentioned before, wanted to experiment with local ingredients. Outside of our Sun Grant beer, we wanted to look into what we could do with some pilot batches. We ended up actually getting some hops from OSU to make a small batch. And we also wanted to look into decarbonizing our distribution and our sales fleets. So when I say we have a zero waste program, there were two very large outdoor events we had at Land Grant. These are both F-permit events. We blocked off the whole parking lot. We blocked off the vacant lot next to us. So this All-American Barbecue was a partnership with Homage. We brewed a beer for them. They made a shirt for us. It was a wonderful partnership. Look at that American flag in there. So, bear with me. I'm not normally awake this early, but so I just kind of threw a little screenshot there in the bottom, but we, with our volunteers, with our staff, and in relationship with SWACO, we pulled trash from our waste stations, we weighed them, we tracked all of the information. As you can see, we did about 100 pounds of compost, more than 300 pounds of recycling, and just over 150 pounds of actual waste that went to the landfill. So we had a 72.74% diversion rate. That's pretty good, but we were aiming for a 95% diversion rate. And a true zero waste event is 100%, but we don't really have the infrastructure for that right now. The second event we had was our third anniversary party. This was later in the year. This was in October. You can see this was a bit of a larger event. There was a lot more waste involved. 270 pounds of compost, 340 pounds of recycling, but 446 pounds of waste. So we had a lower diversion rate here of 57.84%. So some things worked here, but some things didn't. So this is kind of the challenges we came across with this sector of our program. And first, what I can say about both those large events is the real problem was plastic cups. I didn't know until this year that you can't recycle plastic cups in Ohio. I know that because I called everyone who recycles in Ohio, and none of them will take plastic cups. They'll take metal, they'll take scrap, they'll take industrial concrete, but they won't take plastic cups. That's weird. I don't know. That's just me. But you might say to yourself, like, why didn't you get compostable cups? Why didn't you get bioplastic cups? Why are you using plastic cups at all? Well, there was a couple thousand people at both these events. We didn't want to use glass. It's a safety issue. And in defense of the bartenders, that would really suck to clean all of that glassware. So we looked into biodegradable cups, but there's no facility that can take them. And when we say a biodegradable cup, if we're talking about bioplastics, you can't just throw those in the ground. There's an entire process beforehand, and there's no facility nearby that'll take that. At the All-American Barbecue, we had a higher diversion rate, probably because we had a lot more cans. The whole event was centered around releasing this beer called the All-American Pale Ale. We released it outside. There's cans of it everywhere. That really helped our recycling efforts, and it kept the landfill stuff down. We didn't really do that at the anniversary party. This was small batch beers from our draft system, so there were more cups in the end. That's something we're going to try and figure out as the year goes on. We do have a lot more events this year. I also mentioned that we looked into decarbonizing our sales and distribution fleet. If you look in the top left, you'll see me driving a 2017 Nissan Leaf. It is incredible to drive these cars. However, there's not enough of them. By the time we worked with Clean Fuels Ohio, we worked with Smart Columbus. And we worked with Nissan to try and get a fleet of 7 of these for our sales fleet. But there are so many incentives for EV vehicles right now that by the time we were ready to buy them, the only ones available were in Seattle, and they wouldn't sell them to us. So the sustainability person in me says, that's really good. You know, if there's more of these vehicles going out into the world, fantastic. So what we decided to do is kick that down the road. This year, there's a new model coming out. We're going to try and be a little more proactive, again, renewing our relationship with Clean Fuels Ohio, working again with Smart Columbus. We're going to try and change out our sales fleet. However, we won't be able to change out our distribution fleet because there's a bit of a hole in the EV market right now. There's no kind of box vans. There's nothing larger than kind of a passenger vehicle or a passenger van. There is some stuff coming out in a couple years, but kind of our old van just died and we need a new one pretty quickly. And I also mentioned the EPA's Materials Marketplace. This is a phenomenal tool that I don't think we were able to take enough advantage of last year. We were able to do a couple trades on there, but something I'm going to look into this year is really maximizing the potential there. So then the second pillar is reduction of carbon footprint. In this, we wanted to focus entirely on our utilities and managing the equipment. So we do a monthly utility tracking. We evaluated solar at our facility. We created a daylighting calendar, equipment start, run, and shutdown times. We adjusted the set points. We created an energy efficiency maintenance program in part with our friends at Allagash Brewing in Portland, Maine. And we completed a lighting project. But a big place to start is, with anything, monthly utility tracking. Now, I said earlier that the BA provided, the Brewers Association provided a lot of tools for this. So I'm going to walk you through those tools with our electricity. So this is from the BA's utility tracking tools. This is an input page. What I have highlighted there in red is our electricity usage for the last 6 months of 2017. If you look down the left side, you'll see different metrics: total waste, total water, different dollar amounts for each. Once I have input all of those, I can go to this dashboard. Again, we're still on electricity, and this is also for 2017. That gold dot you see on both graphs is land grant. The non-gold dots you see on those graphs are every other brewery that reported this information that is within 1,000 to 10,000 barrels. Now that's incredibly important because now I can go to my bosses and say, look, there are people who make just as much beer as we do, if not less, if not a little bit more, and they are more efficient than us. You'll see our efficiency scores there at the bottom, also highlighted in red, and we are just under the median for our kilowatt usage for last year. So we know we can be better. There are examples of breweries, again, our size, our scale, that are doing better. So it provides us with the incentive and the knowledge that it can be done. Then we can set some targets, and again, using this BA tool. That teal line you see there above the blue line, that's the targets we set for last year. The blue line is what we actually did. So we are under our target for the whole year for electricity last year, which is absolutely wonderful. But the point of me showing you these tools is how important it is to track utility data. If you're somebody who ever wants to work as some kind of facility manager or just begin any kind of sustainability job, this is always the easiest, low-cost place to start, and this is probably where we have made the most impact. We also did a lighting replacement project. We worked with Evolve Lighting, Columbus-based company. This was funded by that beer I mentioned earlier, the Sun Grant beer. All of the money for that went to a complete lighting change at our facility. We reduced our outdoor lighting consumption, well, energy for outdoor lighting consumption by 80%, indoor energy consumption for lighting by 50%, which, when looking at our bills, was a very large amount. That being said, there were also challenges here. I told you we looked into solar. We looked at Third Sun. Third Sun is a wonderful company. They're based out of Athens. They are the largest installer, I think, in the region. They're a mom and pop company. They're great to work with. I also told you at the beginning that our building was a rehab. Apparently we didn't rehab it enough because that roof would collapse if we put solar panels on it. It's kind of funny, I think. But what they told us was, if at any point you're going to change your roof in the next 10 years, I wouldn't put these up right now. It was something we were able to afford, but it's something that, for safety reasons, we shouldn't do. That being said, at the time, we didn't own the building that we operated in. We rehabbed it. We had a great relationship with the landlord, but we didn't own it, which means we couldn't take advantage of a lot of financial incentives. That being said, we are actually making moves right now, and we'll own this building in a couple weeks, hopefully. And at that point, we'll be able to take advantage of some of those, and that is something we're going to look into next year. Well, this year. At the same time, this is a picture of a snowy day last month. You might have known it has been about like 5 degrees outside. In the back of our brewery, it is also 5 degrees. That's not really funny for all the brewers, but because of that, we have a pretty bad envelope for our building. We have a lot of energy leak. We have a lot of heat loss. Again, though, we're going to take advantage of some financing work, chiefly through PACE, and try and insulate the whole building, change out everything in the back, and help us meet our goals. At the same time, we also tracked our CO2 usage. Now, CO2 is an integral part of the craft beer process. We use it to carbonate the beer, but we didn't have any kind of management program in place for it. I tracked the information, but we didn't address it in any way. And I say that because I just said before how important it is to track your utilities and manage them. This is an example of something we didn't manage, and we actually lost efficiency on that this year. That being said, after everything, water is the biggest part of brewing. Justin Reich, probably one of my favorite brewers at Land Grant, is this wonderful quote. I don't think this is verbatim, but basically 90% of brewing is janitorial work. It's not always fun to be a brewer, but at the same time, we worked into a daily water calendar for just our cleaning processes. Not for the water that goes into the beer, but for every other aspect of it. At the same time, we also set a goal to divert all of our brewing byproduct. Now, I'm going to explain this after the fact, but I do have a handy little video that should kind of walk you through what brewing byproduct looks like. And we're going to allow this to go.
There you go.
Yeah, me to say, hey, this is what I was doing. Probably within a month's time, I imagine it'll probably drop by a foot or so. This hay just sucking.
Just so nice. So I show that because before I would go and explain a lot of those things, I I want you to have a visual reference for what they are. So I'll break it down a little bit more for you. But spent grain is that first substance. It looks like oatmeal. This is pretty endemic of the entire brewing industry, but almost all of the spent grain in Columbus is spoken for. It already goes to cattle farms, and that's true for basically every brewery here. We have worked since opening with Huffman Farms out in Hilliard. They come pick it up from us once, sometimes twice a day. It makes their cows very happy. Something we haven't done since we opened is do something about our spent yeast. Now, this is something we tackled this year, and yeast, in the most basic terms, is very high in nitrogen, very low in pH. So it is horrible for city pipes and it's horrible for freshwater ecosystems. What it's not horrible for is soil and compost piles. So the farm we went to in that video was St. Stephen's Aquastar program. It's an aquaponics urban farm over in Linden. If anybody here wants to volunteer for anything, I can't recommend them enough. We also worked a little bit with Stratford Ecological Center, and also, of course, we work with Waterman Farms here at Ohio State. Chris, who couldn't be here today, is a reason I'm here right now. And Chris reached out to us when he found out we were working with Waterman Farms, because the yeast we give to Waterman goes, again, to their Garden of Hope, their cancer recovery garden. I guess I just want to take a second to just think about that. We're talking about something that is essentially organic industrial waste that is harmful to human infrastructure, is harmful to natural ecosystems. But with a couple handshakes and a couple deliveries, it literally goes to cancer recovery efforts. I can't think of a better example of a circular economy. And this just, again, these are handshake deals. There's no money exchanged in any of this. This is something that creates a good for them, and it does a service for us. I would drive that home as an excellent point of what a circular economy can be. All that being said, we're very proud of our water efforts, but we don't do quite enough. There's a third byproduct you didn't see in that video. It is called trube. It's basically hop residue and plant matter. Trube is difficult because we don't produce much of it, and what we do produce comes out at 190 degrees, so it's very hard to capture. And also, unlike spent grain and spent yeast, it's not as easy to apply to organic or farming situations, I should say. But this is something we're looking into a couple things this year. I've got a couple ideas, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to pull it off. This is that graphic again, just to drive that point home. But an interesting point, too, when we work with St. Stephen's and when we work with Waterman Farms, not only are we able to send them spent yeast, but they're able to send us agricultural ingredients back. We've used mint from St. Stephen's. We use pumpkins from Waterman Farms for different specialty beers, so we actually were able to close the loop on those things. That being said, again, there are some challenges with this, as with everything. We aren't diverting our trube. More importantly, that daily water calendar I told you about turned out to be a real pain in the ass to do that every day. It's just too much information to be able to keep up with. That being said, me and our brewery operations manager, we have come up with an idea to track it on a longer timeline. It's valuable information, but I think we're going just a little too granular. And also, we can be more efficient in how we capture our grain and our spent yeast, and those are things we're going to try and formalize this year. Last but not least, our community pillar. Now, this is something I know about, but our community partnerships manager, Jackie Kimball, who's sitting right up here in the front and is a wealth of information. She manages this program. She does an incredible job, and I would encourage you, if you have any questions, please talk to her afterwards. But in short, just as we did a materiality questionnaire to our staff, we also sent a questionnaire to our stakeholders in our community, especially in Franklinton. We asked them what was important to them in terms of philanthropic giving. And from there, we came up with 3 tiers: education, community, and environmental sustainability. By the end of 2017, we were able to donate just over $45,000 to different philanthropic efforts around the community. This is through fundraisers, through community happy hours in our tap room, and philanthropic beer styles and merchandise. So community happy hours, this is something that we're really proud to do because we are able to provide a space for free and fundraise for different nonprofits. Now, we do like to focus on Franklinton. Those are our neighbors. That's our neighborhood. But in 2017, we had 100 different local nonprofits come into our tap room. This is something where they'll be there for 2 or 3 hours, and during that 2 or 3 hour period, we'll donate 20% of the sales we have from the duration of that time. At the same time, if you have ever worked with a nonprofit or been a part of a nonprofit, you know how valuable space is, and somewhere to organize, somewhere to have a platform, to have an event, and that's something we pride ourselves in being. This will probably destroy Jackie's email, but if you are interested, please email her. I also told you we have dedicated philanthropic beer styles, and this is where I got one of the ideas for Raw. Neutron is our double IPA that goes to the Neutron Man Memorial Fund. One Goal, One Ride is our partnership with Pelotonia. So essentially the way this works is if you buy this beer in our tap room, if you get a pint of it on draft, or if you buy a six-pack, $1 from both of those goes into different goes to these different funds. Last year we did $3,000 for Neutron Man. We did $12,000 for Pelotonia. Merch, we did a Pride shirt last year, and this shirt was so popular we had to reprint it 3 or 4 times. All of the proceeds went to Stonewall Columbus, and we raised $3,400. At the same time, we donate not just money, but time. We volunteered a total of 117 hours. One of the things we all definitely loved doing was Litter League. We would get together Saturday mornings, walk around the neighborhood of Franklinton along with 10 other teams, those little very scientifically advanced grabbers, and pick up whatever litter there was on the ground. Now it might not sound like a lot, but that is something that will make a very, very measurable impact on the community. We came in 4th, unfortunately, but we're hoping to rally this year. When it comes to philanthropy, the biggest challenge can be measuring the long-term impact of what you give. Of course, it's good to give to nonprofits. Of course, it's good to help these groups, but it's just hard to know. It's hard to see the difference, not hard to know the difference. And that can be a tough sell for some people. At the same time, our giving budget is attached to our gross revenue. So we can't exactly plan ahead how much we can give, but we also make sure we don't overextend ourselves. I do want to take a second here to highlight the fact that in Ohio, if you make alcohol, correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, but you cannot write off charitable giving. You cannot get tax breaks from it. At the state and federal level, thank you. So this means that we don't write off any of this. We donate this because it's the right thing to do to our neighborhood and to our community. And another challenge that we might face is that we start to develop relationships with these nonprofits. It's really nice to work with someone who has their stuff together, who's able to show up and be organized. That being said, the nonprofit community group world is not an easy one to be in. And somebody who could be very new to being a nonprofit might not be organized yet. And we don't want to turn our backs on someone just because they're new. And that's something we want to address moving forward. So I told you a little bit about what our different programs are. I told you about our 2020 goals, but by the end of last year, we were able to use, from our different programs, 21.24% less energy per barrel of beer, 12% less gas, therms, per barrel of beer, 10.4% less gallons of water per barrel of beer. We were able to create a diversion program for spent grain and yeast, but not for Trub. We were able to create a zero waste event effort. We diverted over 1,000 pounds from the landfill, but we never reached 95% diversion. And we didn't have a CO2 program, which means we actually used 5.4% more pounds of CO2 per barrel package. Now, again, I don't want to come up here and tell you that everything is fine. We're going to work on these things, but some things didn't work, and we want to be transparent and address that. In closing, when I talked with Joe about this originally, I was a student here what feels like not too long ago, and I actually remember coming to one of these with Dr. Drobny's class. And I know that if you're an EADS major or any kind of major, you might say, like, how am I going to get a job after school? And there are all kinds of jobs out there, but I did want to tell a very, very short story of Aparna Dial, who used to work at Ohio State, briefly worked with the city. When I graduated and I was looking for a job, I reached out to Aparna in the hopes that she would be able to point me towards something with her, pretty much. I was asking her for a job. And I emailed her, and instead of her emailing me back, she called me like 5 minutes later, set a meeting with me like the next day, and I came in, told her what I was trying to do, and she said, look, whatever your degree is, you made it through college. College is difficult, but it forces you to be organized, forces you to talk to people, forces you to know how to sell yourself and sell your ideas. So when you go somewhere, just because there isn't a sustainability manager job or whatever position you're looking for, but if there's something else you can get that uses another part of your skill set, take advantage of that. And then when you're there, create a sustainability program and pitch it to them. And that's kind of what I did. But that's intrapreneurship. When I was in the EADS program, a really good friend of mine, an NFL student, Gus Martin, who I believe now lives in California, we talked about this a lot. Like, what are the actual jobs we're going to do after this? And we were both very passionate about the subject, but there's not just jobs everywhere that have sustainability attached to the front. And we both recognized while we were in school that we're going to have to create these jobs. You're going to have to tell somebody this is why this is important. Here's how much money you're going to save. Here's the impact you're going to have in your community. Here's the impact you're going to have on the environment. That might sound scary, but people are super interested in sustainability. Honestly, it's super cool, but I'm a little kind of a geek about it. But I just want to pass that along to the students. Like, don't be afraid to try and create something, put yourself out there. People seem to enjoy it. But I also mentioned before that before I talked about land grant, I also talked about the situation that allowed sustainability at land grant to be. The people with power have the will to act on this, and there's collaboration across industry of resources. Without those things, I would be trying to figure out a lot of this stuff on my own. I think where I'm trying to lead this is essentially, if you're passionate about sustainability and environmentalism, whether you're a faculty, whether you're staff, whether you're a student, whether you're somebody who came to this, a company isn't just gonna change the game. You know, I could turn land grant into a spaceship, we could have zero emissions, zero impact on the environment, but climate change is still real. Water scarcity is still real. Environmental issues are still real. What I have learned here is that we need to internalize the externalities. I hope one of my old professors loved that I just said that, but it's in our core business model to be sustainable, to be environmentally sustainable, and to be socially sustainable. But if the market were different, if there were regulations, if there were incentives, we would do more quicker. And that's kind of the point I want to leave at, that vote for people who care about climate change. That's all I have. Cool.
Thank you, Vincent. We have plenty of time for questions.
Do you know how many other breweries in Columbus have efforts like this, or are you guys one of the only ones?
I believe we are kind of the only ones to formalize it. I know that North High Brewing does a lot of work with water. I'm working on a project with them for some kind of spent yeast stuff for next year. But as far as I know, a small craft brewery hiring someone to be a full-time sustainability person is pretty uncharacteristic.
Hey, Vinny, how's it going? Matt Stevens, with Smart Columbus. One question I had for you, which definitely touched in on the plastic cup program. How does packaging play into the factors here too? And what kind of strategies have you seen at other breweries or you're looking at as well?
So when it comes to packaging for us, most beer is packaged in either cans or bottles. And again, this is another point where New Belgium has done a ton of research into what the actual impact of a bottle of beer is or a can of beer. We went with cans because they are slightly better than glass bottles, but some people will also tell you that it's pretty negligible one way or the other. I do know that the Brewers Association is currently working on adjusting federal glass bottle recycling programs. Right now, they're kind of taking on state by state. They're doing a lot of work in Colorado. They have like the Glass Recycling Collective, because if that can be remediated, if there can be a better recycling program for glass or a more efficient one that has less of an impact, then we might switch to bottles if it's a little more environmentally friendly. Does that answer your question? Cool.
In one of your early slides, you showed what appears to be the growth over the past few years, that your production is growing over time. Where do you see the production scale of land grant going, and what kind of challenges is that going to place on your sustainability efforts?
I can tell you that the focus for us right now is to be a Columbus brewery and be deep in Columbus. We want to grow deep roots here. Obviously, we're going to try and keep brewing more beer and probably at some point in the next couple of years expand throughout the state. That's something that the bigger we get, we achieve better economies of scale, and we can pull off far more sustainable projects. Our biggest obstacle right now is that we're very small comparatively. So my initial reaction is to say that I hope we grow a little bit more because it'll give us the capacity to have less of an impact. That might sound kind of counterintuitive, but that seems to be the thing that I see across the whole industry. New Belgium is hyper sustainable because they do 2 million barrels of beer. You know, we can't just achieve that right now. That being said, at some point, we will probably need to get a new building. And something I have talked to our owners about, they're interested in building a new building. So we're talking a little bit about lead for new building design right now, if we ever were to do a new facility. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Can you hear? Sorry.
Yeah.
Going off of that, would you try to stay in Franklinton, or would you just kind of you'd stay in Columbus? But
To be honest, I couldn't really say. That's more of a decision that our owners are going to make, and I'll react to, and I'll talk with them about. But I don't really know what the plan is after next year, to be totally honest. We'll get to you, I swear.
Hi, I'm with Ohio State, but also with Lineage Brewing, and I know you said you were working with North High on. Did you say the yeast?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So I was curious if you have because a lot of breweries are even smaller than Land Grant, and don't have the capacity to have a dedicated sustainability person. Are you doing any sort of work with collectively working with the industry locally to try and do some of these sustainability measures?
Yes. I actually am supposed to meet with Mike from Lineage, tomorrow. Something I'm working with North High on is to try and work with all of the breweries in Columbus and see if we can pool our resources for a kind of citywide yeast diversion, byproduct diversion program. It's in its very, very early stages. Right now, we're just trying to figure out what the scale is. I do know that wastewater regulations for breweries are probably coming by the end of this year. So it's something that we have been able to work with different farms and take this stuff and not just turn it to waste. And so we're hoping ideally we'll be able to pull off a similar model for everyone. Again, that's kind of a matter of scale, and we're just trying to figure that out right now. But I'll probably see you on Wednesday then. So.
Thanks. One of your slides was about water reduction. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? And I know that you've met some of my colleagues from Ohio EPA, but I do want to talk with you about the E3 award in encouraging environmental excellence, something that we can talk about offline.
Sure. So with a lot of our utility stuff, and water included this year, the byproduct diversion took up a lot of the focus for water efforts. But managing our utilities came down to measuring our operations. What I mean by that is with that water calendar that we tried to do, we thought if we could track our water usage every day and see and develop a baseline for each process. For example, if this fermenter needs to be cleaned, I know that I don't need to use any more than 50 gallons of water. I'm just pulling that number out of nowhere. The idea was if we could establish that baseline, then we could manage that. That didn't work out because we have like 10 different faucets for cleaning different things in the facility. It was just a little too granular. So what we're trying to do this year is measure water over a longer time, still try and get our processes down, but we can't really know the impact of that unless we have this measurement in place as well. Does that answer that question? I'm still trying to figure it out myself, but.
Yeah, I'm curious about the economics of this. So you put a lot of sort of data up there in terms of reduction of this, reduction of that. So obviously Land Grant must be getting some sort of economic benefit out of this. I just was curious if you could reflect on how does this sort of help the business out economically, and how does it even support your position? Because I assume part of the rationale here is that they can fund your position because of the reductions and cost savings here.
Right. So when I pitched the program, I showed you earlier those 2020 goals that we established. Basically, if we are able to move towards that level of efficiency that we're setting for 2020, compared to business as usual, we'll end up saving $45,000 a year on just our utilities. That doesn't even take into account whether people want to buy our beer more because they think we're sustainable, because they enjoy that aspect of our business. We are going to release a formal, forward-facing sustainability report for the end of this year. But I can tell you that right now, I still have to kind of crunch the numbers a little bit more, but we have come in about $13,000 under our budget for the year for utilities. So that's just our kind of year one economics, and we haven't really taken advantage of any real financing tools at this point. Does that answer that pretty well? Oh, cool.
Sure. More of a story than a question, but last night, presuming my son's information was accurate, he shared that Montana is the second or third largest hops producer in the United States, and this year they lost 90% of the hops crop to high temperatures in Montana, so relating probably to global warming, so and reinforcing some of your goals and why it's important.
Thank you. I can tell you too, we talked a little about this earlier. Hop growing is super weird. It's a great way to say that, but like you were saying, Montana is second. Pacific Northwest, specifically Oregon and Washington, 90% of American hops come from there. There's also European hops, New Zealand hops, but the Pacific Northwest is the ideal climate for growing hops, and because of climate change, that's changing. There is an effort to diversify the hop supply chain, in part from the Brewers Association. That's something they're doing some research on right now. That's a massive undertaking. I think it's a great opportunity, one, in just being more sustainable and diversified, but also two, there's a lot of really cool farm jobs that come from that. There is the Ohio Hop Growers Guild. We have worked with them a little bit, different farms around the state. One of the challenges of being a hop farmer is it is a very expensive upfront cost, and your hop plants won't reach maturity until about the third year, and that basically means you're not going to have hyper consistency until 3 years on. So those are the challenges hop farmers face, but I know that most of the hop farms in Ohio are just this year reaching their third year of maturity, and we're looking at using some of those now. So I don't know if that helps you at all. But cool. Anybody else? Okay. Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Vincent. I have to say, we've done a lot of these programs. Some of them touched me. This one touched me today. It's very inspiring to see what our graduates do, and I appreciate the Environmental Professionals Network. It's nice to hear stories about how we've propelled you, or you sort of networked here, and Aparna Dow has spoken to us before, and many of the people we referred to. So, Vinny, as a token of appreciation, we'd like to give you this. I think you might be the first student that's graduated from Ohio State that's come back and shared to us at a presentation like this. David, I don't know. Have we had anybody else? Close, okay. But thank you very much. Yes, go ahead. I love the chance that we have a chance to profile sort of like our excellent professionals out there in the field, and to sort of have such an articulate presentation by you was quite a delight. I hope you have a chance to share this information with others. I think it's very inspiring, and it's very important for us to hear stories about how people can make a difference through just simply sort of positioning themselves at the right place at the right time. So thank you very much. Well, that does it about for today. Please turn to the back of your program to see what we have for our exciting new events coming up. February 13th, we'll have a program for Love of Rivers, celebrating 50 years of the Scenic River Act. That program will feature some folks from the Scenic Rivers program, and as well as former First Lady Hope Taft, who will lead a discussion on what it takes to keep a river scenic, when she talks about her local efforts to protect the Little Miami State and National Scenic River right in her own backyard. Also, the school is celebrating its 50th anniversary, and I'll be sharing a few remarks at that session about what we have exciting planned for this year related to our 50th anniversary. Then on March 6th, in conjunction with the Water Management Association of Ohio, who we've partnered with for several years now, we'll focus on a different side of water issues with a panel conversation focused on flooding. We'll have an executive director of the Association of State Floodplain Managers here who consults across the United States, and was recently in Houston, Texas as part of the recovery and rebuilding efforts there. So I think that'll be a very fascinating and informative sort of session there. We have a number of other sort of future events, but just look at the program, sign up at osu.epn.edu to learn more about our programs, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.